A warlord who crushed 1,000 worlds should have died on that frozen moon, but something impossible happened. A human nurse told him to sit still, and the universe obeyed. If you want to know how compassion became more dangerous than conquest, tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. The medical transport broke apart over Vorath 9 like a promise nobody kept. Lyra Connors woke up tasting blood and frozen air, half buried in black ice with her medkit somehow still strapped to her chest. Around her, wreckage smoked against a sky the color of old bruises. She was 29, trained for emergency triage, and absolutely certain she was about to die. She didn't know yet that the plasma tube she'd grab in 4 hours would change an entire war. The Zarth found her before hypothermia did. 7 feet tall, gray-skinned, golden eyes that calculated her worth in seconds. Their leader stood closest, a scar bisecting his face like someone had tried to split his skull and failed. Warlord Varric Toll, conqueror of 17 systems, stared down at the small human with red hair and freckles burned by cold. "Prisoner," he said in accented standard. Not a question. Lyra coughed, tasted copper. "Nurse, actually, but sure, let's go with your thing." They dragged her to the encampment, a sprawling cemetery of tents and frozen mud where soldiers moved like ghosts who'd forgotten how to haunt properly. Everything smelled like infection and defeat. She counted 13 men limping, 4 with visible gangrene, and 1 kid who wouldn't see morning without antibiotics. Varric shoved her into a supply tent. "You are specimen for study." "Great. I've always wanted to be educational." Lyra grabbed a metal case from the wreckage pile, flipped it open. "USCSS Nostromo Medical Kit," the label read. Inside, barely enough to treat a paper cut. She looked up at the warlord, then at the plasma heating tube mounted on the tent pole. She didn't ask permission. She snapped the tube free, twisted it until it sparked, and jammed it into a pile of fabric scraps. Flame caught. Heat bloomed. Every Zarth soldier turned. Varric's hand went to his weapon. "You dare—" "If you want me alive to study," Lyra interrupted, warming her frost-burned hands, "someone needs to stop dying of infection, starting with you." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was worse. It was doubt. She pointed at the suppurating wound on his left shoulder, the one he thought his armor hid. "That's going septic. You've got maybe 3 days before it hits your bloodstream. Then you get to experience human medical terminology like rigors, organ failure, and my personal favorite, completely preventable death." Varric stared at his own hands. They were shaking. That hadn't happened in 20 years. "You are insane," he said. "Insane would be running. Practical is making you useful." She kicked an empty container toward him. "Boil water, clean cloths, and if anyone here wants to keep their limbs, I suggest they get comfortable with the concept of medical priority over military rank." A young lieutenant, Kale Rin, stepped forward. His eyes held something Lyra would later recognize as desperate hope. "The human speaks truth, Commander. Our wounded—" "Our warriors," Varric cut him off. "We do not beg mercy from prisoners." Lyra stood, all 5'3" of her, and met the warlord's golden gaze. "Then don't beg. But when gangrene smell gets bad enough to choke your whole camp, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned back to the fire, hands steady despite the fear screaming in her skull. Behind her, Varric looked at his infected shoulder, then at the dying soldiers, then at this impossible human who'd made fire out of nothing and demanded he kneel to medicine. In 3 days he'd be begging for her opinion, but nobody knew that yet. The tent flap rustled. Someone small watched from the shadows, a child with gray skin and 2 human eyes. She disappeared before Lyra could focus. "Tomorrow," Varric said quietly. The word came out like surrender. "You have until tomorrow to prove your worth keeping alive." Lyra smiled, exhausted and terrified, and somehow defiant. "Then you better find me that water." because nobody's dying on my watch. Not even you." The warlord who'd conquered 1,000 worlds stared at the nurse who'd just ordered him around like a disobedient patient. And for the first time in 30 years of war, Varric Toll didn't know what to do next. Outside, the wind carried ash and snow. Inside, a fire burned, and between them, something impossible began to shift. Varric appeared at dawn with a bucket of boiling water. He set it down without looking at her, jaw clenched like the delivery cost him something vital. "Where do I start?" he asked, voice flat. Lyra looked up from organizing supplies. She'd spent the night turning chaos into order, sorting through contraband medical gear with labels that made her want to laugh and cry. The thermometer read, "Paragon temp, renegade heat," like someone at a factory had a sense of humor about moral choices. "Roll up your sleeve," she said, "and sit down." "I do not sit down." She pointed at a supply crate. "You conquered 1,000 worlds, but you're going to argue with basic wound care? Sit." He sat. The motion looked physically painful for someone used to standing over everyone. Lyra cleaned the infection with movements that were gentle despite her sharp words. Up close, Varric was even larger, his gray skin marked with scars that told stories in a language she didn't want to learn. But his shoulder was angry red, hot to touch, definitely infected. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I have survived." Yeah, 17 systems, very impressive, shut up and breathe." She pressed the wound, draining it. He didn't flinch, but his hands gripped the crate edge hard enough to dent metal. When she finished bandaging, he stared at the clean white cloth like it was alien technology. "Why? Why what? Why help your enemy?" Lyra packed away supplies. "Because infected shoulder doesn't care about politics, and because my grandmother would haunt me if I let someone die of something this stupid." She pulled out a cracked mug, poured something that barely qualified as tea from a heated canteen. "Here, it's mostly synthetic, but at least it's warm." Varric took the cup, confused. "This is kindness? This is not wanting corpses to smell up my workplace." But she smiled, small and tired. "Drink the tea, warlord. Doctor's orders." He drank. It tasted like recycled engine oil and false hope. It was the best thing he'd had in months. Over the next week, something impossible happened. Lyra turned the medical tent into what the soldiers started calling the smoke shelter because of the constant fire she kept burning. She demanded things: clean water, separated areas for wounded, food that didn't actively poison people. "You are prisoner," Varric reminded her during one argument. "Then imprison me. But they're dying of gangrena, and when the smell gets bad enough, even your pride won't be able to stand it." The next day, he showed up with proper firewood and clean blankets. Kel Rin, the young lieutenant, became her shadow. He watched her stitch a wounded human soldier with the same care she'd used on Zarth warriors, and asked, "How do you choose who to save?" "I don't choose. Medicine chooses. Whoever's dying fastest gets treated first. Rank, species, side of the war, all irrelevant in triage." She glanced at him. "Your commander understand that concept?" "He is learning," Kaelrin said quietly. "Because of you." The hybrid child appeared more often now, watching from doorways. Lyra caught her one evening when she coughed, a wet sound that spoke of pneumonia. "Come here," Lyra said softly. The girl froze, half Zarth and half human, belonging nowhere. Her gray skin held warmer undertones, her golden eyes too round, her hair almost auburn in certain light. "I won't hurt you." Lyra held out the medicine that was really just warm broth. "What's your name?" "Thressa," she whispered, "but I'm not supposed to exist." "Well, you do exist, and you're sick, so let's fix that." Lyra wrapped a blanket around tiny shoulders. "Can you read?" Thressa shook her head. "Want to learn?" The girl's eyes went wide. Lyra pulled out a battered book from her personal kit. The Little Prince in Standard. We'll start with this. It's about someone who didn't belong anywhere either. He turned out pretty important. They were reading when Varric found them. His face cycled through shock, rage, and something that might have been grief. "She cannot," he started. "She's sick," Lyra interrupted, "and she's a child. Those are the only facts that matter to me." She stood protecting Thressa without thinking about the size difference. "You want to lecture me about bloodlines? Do it after I've saved her life." Varric opened his mouth, closed it, stared at this human who'd somehow made his shame into shelter. "You do not understand?" he said finally. "I understand a kid who needs medicine and kindness. Everything else is your problem to fix." She met his gaze. "Shame is letting the future die to bury the past." It was the first time the warrior couldn't answer. He left. But the next morning, Thressa had her own clean blanket and a child-sized cup with the Wayland-Yutani logo. Someone had been shopping in the supply wreckage. Dr. Haynes, the other human prisoner, watched all this with cynical eyes. "You're building something dangerous," he told Lyra. "Hope. Better than the alternative." "Is it? Hope gets people killed." "So does giving up." She handed him instruments. "Now help me with this surgery, or get out." He helped, because even cynics understood when they were watching something impossible become real. The camp changed, slowly. Soldiers stopped screaming orders and started asking questions. Wounded got clean water. The smoke shelter became neutral ground, and Varric, conqueror of 17 systems, found himself obeying a 5'3" nurse who'd made "sit still and take your medicine" sound like a battle command he couldn't refuse. The ice fever hit like a biological weapon, fast and merciless. It started with Kael'rin's brother. A soldier nobody knew was already dead in the tent he shared with the lieutenant. By the time they found the body, 12 others were shaking with fever, their gray skin turning almost blue. Lyra recognized it immediately. Ice fever, lethal to Zarth, spread through breath in frozen climates, killed in 48 hours without aggressive treatment. "Isolate the sick," she ordered, moving before thinking about whether anyone would listen. "Everyone else masks over faces. Boil everything. Everything." To her shock, they obeyed. She worked 72 hours straight. No sleep. Barely water. Just an endless cycle of checking temperatures, forcing fluids down throats, keeping fires burning hot enough to fight the cold that fed the disease. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. She kept moving. Dr. Haynes tried to leave. She caught him at the camp edge, grabbed his arm with strength she didn't know she had. "Where are you going?" "Away from this death trap. They're doomed anyway. They're sick. There's a difference." She pulled him back. "You're a doctor. Act like one." "I'm a survivor," he spat. "Then survive this. Help me save them." He looked at her, this insane nurse with frost-burned hair and eyes that refused to see failure. Something in him cracked. Not hope, exactly, but something close to shame. "Fine," he muttered. "But when we die, I'm haunting you. Get in line." Varric got sick on the 3rd day. High fever, delirium, the kind of shaking that looked like seizures. Lyra found him collapsed in his command tent, alone, because pride was a disease all its own. "Stubborn idiot," she muttered, half carrying, half dragging him to the medical area. He was twice her weight, but fear gave her angry strength. "You don't get to die. Not after I've put this much work into keeping you alive." She sat up beside his bed, monitoring vitals with equipment that barely functioned. A sign above her workspace read, "There is no try, only treat," in shaky handwriting. Someone's attempt at humor in hell. Varric's fever spiked. He thrashed, calling out names in his native tongue. Sons, she realized. He was reliving the death of his sons in some long-ago battle. The warlord who'd conquered worlds broke apart into a father who'd failed. Lyra didn't realize she was crying while she worked until tears froze on her cheeks. "Stay," she whispered, wiping his forehead with cold cloth. "You don't get to give up. I won't let you." The epidemic raged for a week. Kylreen volunteered to search for medicinal herbs in the dangerous outer zones, trying to save others the way he couldn't save his brother. He found the herbs. He also found a hybrid child trapped under frozen debris. He dug the child out, carried them back, collapsed at the camp edge from exposure and exhaustion. They tried everything. It wasn't enough. Lyra sat beside Kylreen's body, completely still. She'd fought death for a week straight, and here it was, taking someone anyway. Taking someone good. It was the first time a Zarth called a human sister. Dr. Haynes said quietly, standing behind her. "He did, right before he died. Called you sister." Something inside Lyra shattered and reformed, harder and sadder. She stood up, went back to work. Because Varric was still dying, and giving up wasn't in her vocabulary, even when it should be. On the 8th day, Varric's fever broke. He opened golden eyes that tracked slowly to the figure slumped beside his bed. Lyra, asleep sitting up, her head resting on his chest. Exhausted, worn to nothing, still there. The warlord who'd killed for less felt something completely foreign wash through him. Not desire, not obligation. Something softer and infinitely more dangerous. Gratitude. He stayed absolutely still, afraid to wake her. Outside, he could hear the camp moving with unusual order. Soldiers following human protocols because the small red-haired woman had convinced them that warmth defeated death. When Lyra finally stirred, she jerked awake, immediately checking his vitals. "You're alive! Good! I'd have been really annoyed if you died after all that." Her voice cracked on the last word. "How many did we lose?" Varric asked, throat raw. 14. Could have been all of you." She stood swaying. "But it wasn't. That's what matters." "Kylreen?" Silence answered. Varric closed his eyes. Another son, even if not by blood. Another person he'd led to death through this stupid, endless war. "He saved a child," Lyra said softly. "A hybrid kid who wouldn't have made it otherwise. He died doing something that mattered." Varric looked at her, this human who kept teaching him things he didn't want to learn. "You saved me. I saved everyone I could. You're not special, warlord." But she smiled, small and devastating. "Now take your medicine and shut up. Doctor's orders." He took the medicine. It tasted like bitterness and survival. And for the first time in 20 years, Varric Toll cried. Lyra pretended not to notice, giving him the dignity of privacy while she checked on the others. But she'd seen, and it changed something between them that had no name in either language. Outside, Thressa distributed blankets to recovering soldiers, reading passages from her human book to whoever would listen. The smoke shelter held, and slowly, impossibly, so did something else. Hope, maybe. Or just the stubborn human refusal to let death have the last word. Recovery was slower than sickness, which Lyra said was both medically accurate and philosophically annoying. Varric watched her move through the camp like a small hurricane of purpose. She'd started teaching basic hygiene protocols to soldiers who'd conquered star systems, but somehow never learned that clean water prevented disease. She'd turned the smoke shelter into something that looked almost like a real clinic, and she'd made his daughter visible. Thressa no longer hid in shadows. She sat by the fire, reading to wounded soldiers who listened like she was performing sacred texts instead of human children's stories. Her voice carried across the camp, talking about a little prince who visited planets and learned that what matters most is invisible. "She sounds like her mother," Varric said one evening, the words escaping before he could stop them. Lyra looked up from grinding medicine, a task she'd been teaching Thressa in stolen moments. "Want to talk about that?" "No." "Okay." She kept working. No judgment, no pressure, just acceptance. That somehow made it worse, or better. Varric couldn't tell anymore. "Her mother was human," he said finally. "A translator. We were. It was war. It shouldn't have happened. She died in childbirth. I kept Thressa because I couldn't." He stopped, jaw clenched. "The Zarth don't accept hybrids. She's proof of my weakness." "She's proof you're capable of love," Lyra corrected. "Everything else is just fear dressed up as honor. You don't understand our culture. I understand hiding a kid because you're scared of what people think. That's universal." She met his eyes. "Shame is letting the future die to bury the past. You've already lost enough, Varrock. Don't lose her too." He had no answer for that, which was becoming a pattern. Dr. Haynes had stopped being cynical, which was somehow more disturbing than his previous attitude. He actually smiled when a patient recovered. He taught soldiers basic first aid. He'd even made what he called coffee from supplies, though it tasted like industrial solvent. "It's Weyland-Yutani roast," he explained when Lyra made a face. "Premium-grade synthetic. It's awful. It's warm and caffeinated. Pick your battles." He handed her a cup. "You're building something here. You know that, right? Something bigger than medicine." Lyra looked around the camp. Zarth and humans working side by side, Thressa teaching alien children human games, soldiers who'd been enemies sharing warmth around fires. "I'm just trying to keep people alive," she said. "No, you're showing them they're worth keeping alive. That's different." Haynes sipped his terrible coffee. "That's dangerous. Better than the alternative." A soldier approached, hesitant. "Human Lyra, my unit wanted to... We made this." He held out a banner. Rough fabric but carefully sewn with the words "Smoke Shelter" in both Standard and Zarth script. "We wanted you to know we... Thank you." Lyra took it, something tight forming in her chest. "You didn't have to... You saved us. Not because of orders. Because you chose to." The soldier looked embarrassed. "That matters." After he left, Lyra hung the banner above the medical area. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't sure why until Varrock spoke from behind her. "You're crying. Humans do that sometimes. It's called being moved by something meaningful." She wiped her eyes angrily. "Don't read into it. Too late." He moved closer, carefully, like approaching something wild. "Thank you. For saving them. For saving me. For..." He gestured helplessly at Thressa, at the transformed camp, at everything. "For all of it. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. That's why it matters." They stood there, the massive warlord and the tiny nurse, separated by everything except the thing that mattered most. They'd both chosen to care when logic said not to. "Thressa asked if you would teach her to cook human food," Varrock said. "She wants to make something called soup for the soldiers." Lyra laughed, surprised. "Soup? That's ambitious." She said humans believe soup heals everything. "Not everything, but it helps." Lyra glanced at him. "You could learn too. Might be nice, cooking for your daughter instead of conquering things." Varrock looked at his hands, designed for weapons. "I don't know how to be anything but this." "Then learn. You've got time. We're not going anywhere." She paused. "Unless you're planning to execute us dramatically, because I've got a full schedule and would appreciate advance notice." He almost smiled. Almost. "No executions planned?" "Good. Then grab that pot and start boiling water. Thressa's soup lesson starts now." They cooked. Badly. The soup was terrible. Thressa laughed so hard she nearly fell over, and the sound was so pure and unexpected that even battle-hardened soldiers stopped to listen. Varrock looked at his daughter's joy, at Lyra's patient teaching, at this impossible moment of peace in the middle of frozen hell, and felt something inside him shift permanently. He'd spent 30 years conquering worlds. But here, in this moment, teaching a hybrid child to make soup under the instruction of a stubborn human nurse, he felt like he'd finally won something that mattered. "Thank you," he said again, quieter. Lyra nodded, understanding what he meant this time. Not thanks for medicine, thanks for showing him another way to be alive. Outside, snow fell. But inside the smoke shelter, surrounded by unlikely family and impossible hope, it felt almost warm. The transmission came at dawn, crackling through the command tent speakers like judgment. Warlord Toll, the Council offers final evacuation, pure Zarth only. You have 12 hours to decide. Varric stared at the communicator. Around him, the camp he'd built transformed from war machine into something else, something impossible. Pure Zarth, he repeated slowly. The words tasted like ash. The voice continued, cold and precise. Leave the human contaminants and the hybrid. Return to your rightful place among the worthy. This is your last chance to reclaim honor. The transmission ended. Silence filled the space like held breath. Lyra found him an hour later, standing alone, staring at nothing. She knew immediately. The way he held himself. Shoulders back, but somehow defeated. They called, didn't they? She said. Your people. They're offering escape. For those of pure blood. He couldn't look at her. They want me to leave you, and Thressa. So leave. Her voice was steady. Too steady. You're not a prisoner. You never were. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. I'm giving you permission to choose yourself. She moved closer. You've spent your whole life conquering things. Maybe it's time to go home. This is home. The words came out raw. This camp, these broken people, this impossible shelter you built out of stubbornness and human defiance of logic, this is the only home that's ever mattered. Varric, they'll kill me if I stay. The Council doesn't forgive rejection. Then maybe dying here means more than living there. Lyra's voice cracked. But that's your choice, not mine. He finally looked at her, small, human, impossible. The person who'd shown him that strength wasn't about conquest. It was about choosing who you protected. What would you do? He asked. I'd ask myself what kind of person I want to be. She smiled, sad and certain. And then I'd make the choice I could live with, even if I didn't live long. Varric walked to the communicator. His hand hovered over the transmit button. 300 years of Toll lineage, 17 conquered systems, a legacy of power that would die with his next words. He pressed the button. Council, he said, voice clear as breaking ice. I've considered your offer, and I reject it. Static. Then, you reject survival? I reject your definition of it. He looked at Thressa, reading by the fire, at Lyra, watching him with those steady human eyes, at the soldiers who'd learned that caring wasn't weakness. If purity means abandoning those who saved what remains of us, then I renounce the name Toll. I stay here. You will die for them? I will live with them. There's a difference. He disconnected before they could respond. Lyra was beside him instantly. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He touched her face, careful with hands that knew only violence learning gentleness. You already killed me once when you showed me who I really was. Everything after is just extra time. That's the stupidest romantic thing I've ever heard. I learned from humans. We excel at beautiful stupidity. At dawn, Varric walked to the camp perimeter, carrying the Zarth banner inverted. Universal signal of surrender. Behind him, Lyra followed with Thressa in her arms, and behind them, one by one, every soldier in the camp. They expected execution, attack, the Council's final judgment. Instead, the enemy forces lowered their weapons, because word had spread about the smoke shelter, about the warlord who'd chosen healing over honor, about humans and Zarth learning that the warmest fires burned between enemies who'd stopped being enemies. One soldier knelt, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The entire battlefield knelt to the impossible choice. Lyra stood there, watching impossible become real, and finally understood what she'd actually done. She hadn't just saved lives. She'd shown that compassion could be contagious. Fuck yeah, Dr. Haynes whispered behind her. Humanity. Fuck yeah. 6 months later, the camp had a new name, Frontier Clinic 9. The first mixed-species medical facility in Zarth space. Varric worked there without rank, cleaning instruments and teaching soldiers that healing required different courage than fighting. Lyra found him one evening, distributing supplies with Thressa, who was reading medical texts now instead of fairy tales. Or maybe they were the same thing, stories about impossible transformations. "Hey, Warlord," Lyra called. "What's your dosage today?" He looked up, smiled in that way he'd learned from her. Warm, real, human. "What do you prescribe, nurse?" "Walk, no armor, fresh air, maybe some conversation." "And your prescription?" "Company sounds good." She held out her hand. He took it, careful and certain. They walked through the camp where former enemies planted medicinal herbs and melted snow fed new growth. Thressa taught children from both species, human and Zarth, learning together. The banner still hung above the medical tent. Smoke shelter, stitched by soldiers who'd learned that warmth defeated darkness. "You know what humans say?" Lyra asked. "Some people heal wounds. Others heal wars. Sometimes it's the same thing." Varric nodded. "And sometimes a stubborn nurse tells a warlord to sit still and take his medicine, and it changes everything. Sometimes that's exactly what the universe needs." She squeezed his hand. Someone refusing to let death have the final word. Above them, Vorath 9's sky was still gray. The ice was still black. But in the shelter they'd built from nothing but choice and stubbornness and human defiance of logic, everything felt impossibly warm. Because they'd learned what no conquest could teach, that the strongest medicine wasn't in bottles or technology. It was in the choice to care when caring seemed impossible, to choose compassion over efficiency, to pick love even when logic said otherwise. The man who conquered 1,000 worlds learned to kneel. The woman who just wanted to save lives ended up healing an entire species. And together, in the frozen hell of a dying war, they discovered that warmth doesn't come from fire. It comes from choice. From the stubborn, beautiful, absolutely human choice to be kind when the universe says you shouldn't. And that, the galaxy would learn, was the most powerful force in existence. Humanity. Fuck yeah. In the end, Vorath 9 didn't change because a warlord bent the knee. It changed because one exhausted human decided that compassion was not a luxury, but a skill worth weaponizing. And maybe that's the most human truth of all. We don't defeat darkness by being stronger than it. We defeat it by being stubbornly, inconveniently unwilling to stop caring. And now, before you leave this frozen crater of emotions, let me ask you something. If kindness is a choice, why do we treat it like a privilege? What part of yourself do you hide because you think the world won't accept it? Like Varric hid Thressa. And what would your life look like if you gave someone or yourself the chance Lyra gave a dying army? If you stayed with me until now, through infections, soup disasters, and interstellar daddy issues, I want you to write one word in the comments so I know you walked all the way with us. Warmth, because in this story, warmth won the war. Tell me your city, your coordinates in this weird galaxy we call Earth. And if you want to stay in this community of people who enjoy crying and laughing at aliens taking their medicine, hit subscribe, like, hype this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder that humanity still slaps, and don't forget to watch the next video appearing on the end screen card. Humanity, folks. Messy, ridiculous, unstoppable. HFY forever.